Alright, so in this video, we're going to go through the basics on how to mark and cut timber accurately. Now, I've had a few people asking me for a few tips and tricks on how to cut timber. The most common question I've got is people saying that they can cut the timber square, but the measurements aren't always perfect. It's not exactly what they marked out. So we're going to go through how I mark out timber and how I cut it to make sure it's millimeter perfect with every cut. So we've got a stick of timber here, which we are going to cut. Firstly, good practice is always checking the timber straight away to make sure it is square. In this case it is, which is good. So I'm going to hook my tape over, and let's say I want to cut something at 300 mil. Firstly, obviously it's very important that your pencil is nice and sharp. And what I'm going to be doing is marking a line directly on 300 mil, directly in the center there. And as you can see, I'm going back and forth, just making sure that that line is straight and lines up with the line of my tape measure. With that line marked, I'm going to do a tick, and that's going to indicate the off cut. And it is really important when you get your mark to line it up with that 300 and do a few lines going back and forth like that, and just really indicate where it's going to go. For example, if I did want to mark 200, I could get my tape like this, go to the 200 and just do a line. And what we can see there, especially if I pull my square up to it, that line isn't completely square anyway. So the most important thing is to firstly really make sure your mark is definitely true with the measurement you want. I'm just going to roll this over so it's a bit clean, and we're going to remark that 300. Also, probably want to make a note with your tape. You want to make sure you're not going on an angle at all. For example, I will mark the 300 here, and then I'll show you that if I was holding my tape on a slight angle and marked the 300 there, that was obviously exaggerated, but you can see the difference already of about 5 mil. So you got your mark. We're going to move our speed square up to the mark and trace that the whole way through. So the next thing is obviously getting your saw up to do the cut. Now, it doesn't matter what saw you use, but every saw is going to have a little gauge on this base plate showing you where the blade's going to go. And it's very common for people to see that little mark there and look at that mark and look at the base plate as it goes through and cuts timber. That's something I never do. I never recommend doing it this way. What I like to do is actually move over to a place where I can see the blade, either looking through this way, or if I'm standing through this side, I can look through the back and see the blade there. And this is also where it gets important now. We've marked that 300 mil, and that's what we want the block to be. So we don't want to go through and cut the line off, because then we're cutting off that 300 mil, and it's going to be basically 299. What I want to do is line my blade up with the offcut side there. So you can see where my blade's lined up now, we should just be able to see that pencil line when we cut the timber. If you're not thinking about which side of the line you're cutting on, or if you are just directly cutting in the middle of the line, you're definitely not going to get the correct measurement. Firstly, if you're cutting on the wrong side of the line, you've got that entire thickness of the blade to think about, which is about 1.5 mil. So what I'm going to do is line up the saw blade with that mark, and if you're starting off, it could be good practice to also line up that little gauge on the base plate as well. Make sure you are going to be cutting square. Definitely only do that for a few times if you want to just get the gist of it though. In the real world, when you're cutting timber, you don't have the time to stop, check the saw blade, check your mark as well. In the real life, what I'd be doing is, as I approach the timber with my saw, I'll be looking at the edge of the base plate here and just making sure it looks relatively square with the timber and that it's not on any angles. I'm going to be looking at that with one eye, get it so it's fairly decent, and as soon as it's fairly decent and my saw's here, I'm going to turn it on, start cutting and focus on the blade. So if we do have a look at the block, you can just see a little bit of that pencil line left on there. And that pencil line was marked directly on 300 mil, and my block is exactly 300 mil. If, for example, you are cutting your timber and you can see your saw blade going off to the other side of the line, don't keep trying to cut and bend it away. Pull your saw blade out, readjust your saw, and go again. Same thing as if your saw starts jamming up, pull it out, start again, and go through that same line. So the main things I would say to improve your cutting is firstly watching your saw blade when you cut, watching where your saw blade's cutting the timber, and being conscious about which side of the line you are cutting.